It's like,
We forgot to turn the recording on, so now it's on. So,
My whole piece wasn't recorded? Oh,
it was really good though.
yeah,
I'd be happy to do it again.
Yeah.
Another time.
No, that'd be great.
thank you so much,
Yeah,
Renee.
thank you.
Our next reader is Terry Chacon. She has been telling stories for more than 40 years. She told stories in Baltimore and California in the library as a librarian for children. And since then, she's been telling personal stories of her life. I want to welcome Terry up to tell some stories.
Well, school also figures a lot in my story, but in a much more lighthearted way. When I grew up in the mid 20th century, I almost said 19th, but I'm not that old, mid 20th century, in my native state of Maryland, it wasn't compulsory to have kindergarten. So the school in our little town definitely did not offer kindergarten. It was a 1st through 12th grade school. And so when I turned 6, my mother had always said to me, when you're 6, you'll go to school. So my birthday was in April, and I thought, I'm 6, I'm going to go to school. Well, then my mother had a little chat with me, and she tried to explain that the school year went from September to June, and that in September, all the children in our district who had their 6th birthday that year would start school together, and I would have to wait until September. Well, I nodded my head. I pretended I understood, but I thought it was a terrible waste of time. I could already print my alphabet. I could count to 50. And most important of all, I could tell you the names of all 16 Major League Baseball teams and what cities they were from.
Yeah.
I was ready for 1st grade. Now, in our town, the school, the 1st through 8th grade school was at the end of our street because our town had 700 and some people. So you can imagine that it wasn't very big, and the school was really an important building. Lots of things went on there. And my friend Polly and I played outside, often at the end of the street by the school. Now, Polly, of course, didn't know as much as I did because she was only 4 1/2. There's a lot of stuff you don't know, when you're 4 1/2. But we would go onto the school grounds. There was no fence, nothing to keep us from going there. And of course, we loved the playground. There was a slide, swings, and then seesaws. And we would go every day, but we'd always go when there were no children from the school out on the playground. Of course, we loved going on Saturdays and Sundays. And about 2 weeks after my 6th birthday, one morning, Polly and I are playing down at the end of the street by the school. And I said to Polly, I'm going to school today. And Polly said, you can't go to school. You're not big enough. Well, what did she know? She was only 4 1/2. And so I just said goodbye. And I walked past the parking lot where the teachers parked. I went in through the door at the east end of the building, and I knew where I wanted to go. There was only one student in the school that I was really sure of what class she was in, and that was Polly's older sister, Patricia. Patricia was in the 2nd grade. So I thought that's where I'd go, 2nd grade, and see Patricia. And I forgot all about the one problem with Patricia. If you could say that a 7-year-old was mean and mean-spirited, Patricia was. And she was meanest to Polly, her little sister, and by osmosis, I guess, any of Polly's friends. She was mean, she was just mean to everybody. But that left my mind, and I started wandering around the 1st floor, and this boy, I guess he was from one of the high school classes, must have thought I was a 1st grader that was lost or something. So he said, well, what room are you looking for? Where do you want to go? And I said, 2nd grade. So he took me to the door of the 2nd grade classroom, and I knocked on the door. I sort of knew somehow you just don't walk into something as important as a school class. And one of the students, one of the kids opened the door. Who was the first person I saw when that door opened? It was Patricia, because her reading group was up in front of the class having reading to the teacher. And not only was Patricia mean, she was smart. So of course it was the top reading group. And Patricia didn't raise her hand when she saw me. She didn't say, excuse me. She just interrupted whoever was reading and said, that girl doesn't belong in school. She's not old enough to go to school. Well, the teacher, Miss Hutton, was very nice. And she said to me, perhaps there's another classroom you would like to go to, because I think she could see that Patricia was not going to be happy with me in that room. And I suspect that Patricia's the kind of student teachers try to keep happy. So I remembered suddenly that my mother's friend, Mrs. Van Sickle, taught third grade. So I said, I'd like to go to third grade. And Miss Hutton said, she picked one of the students, fortunately not Patricia, to take me to the third grade room. And I knocked on the door again. And this time, Mrs. Van Sickle herself came. And she was so nice. She said, come right in and you can watch what my students are learning. And she let me sit down in an empty desk. And these students were also quiet, and they were writing something or printing something on pieces of paper, and it seemed like they were copying these words that were on the blackboard, but they weren't words like I would make words, because of course all I could do was print, but they were writing what looked like words, and one letter was hooked up to the next letter, to the next letter. And I thought, oh, that was so mysterious and exciting, and probably hard to do. And I wanted to learn to do it too. And they were working so hard. I think they were copying those words. And Mrs. Van Sickle explained to me that her students were learning to write in cursive, and they were practicing. And I could just sit there and watch. And as I say, it was very quiet. But after about 15 minutes, there was a knock on the door. And sure enough, it was my mother. Because of course, Polly had run home and told my mother that I had gone to school. And my mother believed her, even though she was only 4.5. And so my mother took me home. She wasn't mad, but she just explained again the rules about when you go to school. And she said, in September, very beginning of September, you will be able to go to school. Well, that was all summer off, a long time. But finally September came, and I could say on that first day of school, I didn't even need my mother to walk down the street with me. I walked down the street with my classmates, Billy Bolton, Baynard Nickerson, Bennett Smith, and David Stradley. I was wearing a red check-plaid two-piece skirt and jacket, Oxfords and red socks, red bows on my pigtails, and I was definitely an eager student.
Thank you, Terry. That was a delightful story. I loved all the details. Our next performer will be Dave Bowles. He is a poet.
Since you didn't record her, go ahead. I'll donate my time to her.
I mean, no,
Let
what-
her read her thing so it can be recorded.
No, what if I do it after this is over? Do you guys want to stay and I'll redo it? So it's recorded?
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
I mean, I don't mind, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, whatever is.
Yeah,
Well-
yeah, we do, David.
Because we've got.
Yeah, I don't want the audience to hear it again.
Okay, Dave, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, come on.
Please
Dave.
come up. Dave is a poet. He's all kinds of things. I wrote it all out, but I don't know. I just want him to come up and tell a little bit about himself. He has poems from Coyote Vision today, and I look forward to hearing his stories.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Sorry you didn't get recorded.
That's all me.
You move back a little bit. 'Cause
Say you're taller.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Okay. So I have several books I've published. I also publish other writers. I've been doing this for well over 40 years now. And I got into magic and mysticism at a very, very early age. And I've been studying it pretty much all my life. It got to a point in my life where the poetry just wasn't working to get what I needed to get out. And so I came up with the character of Coyote. And my series of coyotes, it starts with Coyote Magic, which is an epic poem. And then some short poems to introduce you to the character of Coyote. From there, my second book is Coyote Vision. There's a third book I'm working on right now called Coyote Spirit. And then my final book is Coyote Genesis. And what Coyote does is he takes me, the narrator, through these epic poems, and we pretty much discuss history and magic. And it's really fun. I enjoy it quite a bit. So I'm going to read a real quick one from Coyote Magic and Other Enchantments. And then I'll read you a section of the long poem from Vision. This is called Coyote Poetry.
Would you like me to hold the other book?
No, I got it. Thank you, though. I found Coyote industriously destroying a piece of paper one grand morning. He had shredded it to pieces with his sharp nails and was now biting it into even smaller pieces. What is this about? I called to him. Why such fervor over a piece of paper? I asked. Coyote stopped for a moment, looking at me with a wary eye. Come no closer, he commanded. I am not through creating. With that, he began throwing the tiny pieces of paper into the air. A swift breeze caught them and whisked them away. Coyote sat watching the pieces float into the sky. Finished, he cried out. That poem was quite difficult. He smiled his trickster smile at me and winked. You're telling me that was a poem? I asked. And a fine one at that, he replied. That piece of paper you tore to shreds and sent into the wind just now, that was a poem. Yes, he huffed a little indignantly. Is something wrong with your hearing? He asked with concern. When I write a poem, I save it to read later or perhaps share it with a friend, I told the wily trickster. Well, that is all fine and well, Coyote stated, but I write to experience the act of creation. When it is done, I set it free. I had never considered such a thing. All throughout my house were stacks of writing, some finished, some not. Surely you keep some of your poetry, I asked. Not a one, he joyfully declared. I have set many of my poems free. The winds have carried my creations across the globe. Where is the sense in that? I asked in rebuke. Well, that is utter nonsense, I cried out. Is it? The trickster asked. Is it really such nonsense? Coyote grew quite serious as he approached me. Which would you rather have, he asked, a collection of words written on paper that will more than likely never see the light of day once you secure them in your journals? He started to laugh. Or to be done with the act of creation and to give them back to the creator, letting the creator distribute them as the creator sees fit. With that, Coyote turned and began examining a rather large leaf that had fallen upon his head. I went back into my house, spying my journals lying limp upon the mantel, and brewed a cup of tea. Got a bad leg. This is,
You want to sit down?
if you wouldn't mind, Thank you. My apologies.
No problem.
So that is the introduction to Coyote. He's a fun character. And it goes on and on and on. So we have many experiences, a lot of them hallucinogenic. I have a proud owner of many hallucinatory experiences. I've traveled, I've done a lot of shamanistic experiences, and that's pretty much what I write about anymore, at exploring what we don't really understand. The great Terence McKenna, who did mind-breaking work in the 70s and then in the 90s with Food of the Gods, is what now medicine is looking towards using psilocybin to treat a lot of things. Well, Terence knew this a long time ago, and he wrote about tribes in South America, Africa, and how they use their hallucinogenic to empower people. And it wasn't just to go, let's go to a dead show and get crazy. It was far, 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 far more than that. Same thing with the Native American Indians. So a lot of that is what I write about. Coyote Vision, the second book, really goes into length into that. I'm going to read a little clip of this. This is from the section called The Sweat. Coyote came running up my path, followed by friend squirrel, rabbit, fox, and a rather large male mule deer. There you are, the trickster cried out. We have been looking for you everywhere. As he rested on my porch, composing himself, the other animals gathered around, anxiously pacing, while Coyote caught his breath. I was down in the cove, I explained, cleaning out the pondweed. Upon hearing this, all the animals stopped pacing and stared at me. Coyote brushed the whole thing off, turning to his friends, saying, he's a little strange, like I told you, but he's harmless. While the gathered animals snickered at my expense, giving themselves knowing looks of merriment, Coyote, now composed, approached me. The reason we are so excited, and also the reason why we were searching for you, is that permission has been given for you to attend our sweat. Coyote and the animals leaped in the air with joy. Can you believe it? He turned to the animals. He's been given permission to sweat. The animals jumped up and down, some spinning in circles. The large deer snorted gleefully, bowing his magnificent rack towards me, pawing the ground before him. I was left speechless. I had absolutely no idea as to what my trickster friend was up to, telling him as much. I'm not up to anything, he retorted. Do you not realize the monumental importance of this? Coyote stared at me for the longest while, swishing his tail back and forth, staring at me for what seemed an eternity. Perhaps you did not hear me correctly. Coyote cleared his throat, and the animals again focused on the wily trickster. You have been granted permission to attend our sweat. Again, the animals rejoiced. The deer bowed down gracefully. Yes, I stammered, but what exactly does that mean? For a moment, there was complete silence. I even believed I could hear the pond weeds growing. The animals stared at me with complete confusion. Coyote turned to them and calmed them, telling them I did not fully understand the ways of nature. They would have to forgive me, and could they please remain understanding? It goes on much further from there. Thank you for having me.
Oh,
Thank you.
halfway to book 3.
Yeah.
Me too.
Well, I'm very happy to introduce this next storyteller. This storyteller is actually sort of a new storyteller. She told me about, I don't know, more than a year ago. Probably it was in August of maybe 21 or 22. I'm not sure which. Anyway, she was a poet and she wanted to be a storyteller. She thought that was interesting. And I thought, great, we'll do something. And so I said, would you like some help? And she told me an idea about a story. And we started. And that's when I realized it wasn't easy to switch between a poet and a storyteller. Poets are very stuck to the written word. Storytellers let the words drift around out there and do various ways to tell stories. After a while, I thought this was going to be easy. After a while, I said, Vicky, you gotta put the paper, I can't remember. I can't put it down. It's okay. And then I asked, because I thought maybe Vicky was getting just one story. Every storytellers have a voice that they find. And I thought, she's only hearing my voice. She needs more voices. So I brought in Angela James, another storyteller most of you know. And then I brought in Adele, which you probably don't know. Anyway, we worked together. And as we worked together, it all came. And she told a great story, May of 2022. It was her life as a Wingco spy. Now, today is Vicky's first time of hosting, and I'm so very, very proud of her. And she has a story to tell you that's going to delight you and also make your life a little more delicious. Vicky?
Before I get started, I just wanted to thank Dave Bowles for his poems today. Thanks, Dave. Okay. Okay. So it was Tuesday morning, and that was one of my happy days because I went to volunteer at my daughter's kindergarten class. And we got ready and opened the door, and it was gray and cold and not too happy. We were also broke because, you know, it was around this time of year and we spent all our money at Christmas. So we trudged to the car and got in. I drove to the school and we opened the door to the classroom, and there was stuff going on in there. There's a big hum and kids moving around. And the teacher said, go back there and help the teacher's aide roll out cookies. We're going to let the kids decorate them and then take them over to the cafeteria. So the kids, we rolled out the dough, and we had a gingerbread man cookie cutter, and the kids cut their cookie out, and then they decorated it with raisins and candies, and then we scooped it out and put it on a cookie sheet. And this went on because there was only two of us, so we could only do two at a time. And we did table by table, and we got them all done. And everybody lined up, all the kids lined up. And then the teacher, and the teacher's aide brought the cookies and the kids to the cafeteria. And the cafeteria lady was waiting for us. The oven was on, it was nice and warm in there. And she assured the children that those cookies would be done soon, and she would bring them to the classroom for us. So we are turning around to go back to the kindergarten class, and we heard this voice. It said, I ran away from the cafeteria lady, and I can run away from you. I'm the gingerbread man. So those kids were like wide-eyed, looking all around and wanting to go find out what's going on. So we had to make them slow down, no running in the hallways, and we walked towards where that voice came from. And we got to the office, and the office lady went, the gingerbread man went that way. And so the kids are, you know, crazy and trying to get going again. I know you got to slow down, walk. And we got them about up to the end of the building. There's a little curve, and we heard the voice again, and it said, I ran away from the cafeteria lady, I ran away from the office lady, and I can run away from you. And then the door shut. So they're looking at each other again, and come on. Okay, slow down, let's walk. And then we got around that little corner, and the principal stuck his head out the door and said, the gingerbread men went that way. So we had to go outside, and there was a long hallway, breezeway, and we're trying to keep the kids walking slow, not running. And we were walking, and we got to the end of it and kind of went around a little curve there. No gingerbread man. And then the computer lady teacher said, she poked her head out the door and said, the gingerbread men went that way. So we were going around the corner, and then we were almost to the kindergarten playground. And the kids were keeping in line, but they were still excited going, oh, I wonder where he went. I wonder where he went. So they got to the kindergarten playground and the other kindergarten teacher said, oh, the gingerbread men just went in your classroom. And then the kids just went crazy and they were in their playground. So we couldn't stop them. They ran to that classroom and opened the door and it just smelled like gingerbread. It was heavenly. And they all went to go find their gingerbread men because they all decorated their own. And, they knew which was what. And they're all sitting there at the table. They were repeating what happened. Could you believe it? There's all this chatter and they were all happy and everything. And that really cold, gray, no money kind of day that started out became a really fun day with no money. Didn't need any money. We just had a great time. And I'll never forget how creative that teacher was. Her name was Mrs. Din. And she always thought of fun little things for those kindergartners to do. And I always loved going on Tuesdays to be part of it. Oh, and I'm wearing this apron because when my daughter graduated kindergarten, all the kids signed this apron for me. And so I won't forget their names. And the teacher wrote me a little note. And I still have it today and it's not even worn out. I take very special care of it.
Oh my God.
And you know how the writing here is kind of bumpy?
Yep.
It reminds me of the little
see.
bumpy things on the gingerbread men.
Uh,
Thank you very much for hearing my story.
alright.
Okay, the next, I'm not gonna thank myself. The next person is John.
Right,
Petrick.
right, get in front of the camera.
Sorry. Okay. The next storyteller is John Petrick, and his title is What I Did on My Vacation. Please come on up and tell us your story.
Thank you, Vicky. Well, I grew up on a farm in a very remote part of South Dakota. And for us, the big trip was to Sioux City, the home of the world's largest stockyards. So I always felt kind of isolated and I wanted to go to the real world where all the cool stuff happened. And in the mid-60s, when I was a kid, all the cool stuff in the world was in California.
Yeah, of course.
The beaches, surfing, Disneyland, the Beach Boys, Annette Funicello. And I'd never been farther than Minnesota. But one summer, my parents decided that they were going to drive to the West Coast. We were going to see a friend of my mom's in Oregon. We were going to go to the Pacific Ocean, and then we were going to go to California.
Ah,
So mom and dad packed 8 kids into this brand new Ford station wagon.
wow.
And I don't remember much about driving out at all. But what I do remember is Union 76 gas stations. We didn't have Union 76 in the Midwest. We had Standard Oil mostly. But the Union 76, when we were there, they had this promotion. They had these little orange balls with a 76 on them, and you put them on your car antenna. And we saw those all over the place, and we thought they were so cool. So we were begging Dad to stop and fill up at a 76 station. And he finally did. And not only did we get one of those balls, or maybe even more than one, we also got this beach ball that was orange and it had a 76. So I'd never been to the ocean before, and I'd never had a beach ball before, but now I was going to be a real California cool. I had a beach ball too.
Yeah.
So Dad does as he promised. He takes us to a beach in California, but he's not going to drive 700 miles down the coast to Southern California. So we're up, maybe up by Crescent City somewhere. And it is cold and it is windy and it is cloudy. So us kids are going across the dunes and are shivering in our swimming suits, and we get down to the beach and we're the only ones there. There's a couple surfers way off in their wetsuits. So we're at the beach in California. So I get out my beach ball and I blow it up and I bat it to my sister, and the wind takes it and it starts going down the beach, and I'm running as fast as I can, and it's just out of my reach. I can't get it. Finally, the wind lets up a little bit and I get my beach ball, and I'm holding my beach ball. And now we know about bomb cyclones, but we didn't know about it then. But I was holding my beach ball, and the barometric pressure must have just dropped, because all of a sudden my beach ball started getting lighter and lighter. And then the wind came up, and then I was way up in the sky. And I wasn't going to let hold of that beach ball because I'd worked so hard to get it. And then I looked down and it was too late to let go. I could see my parents way down there. I could see those surfers over there. And one of those surfers fell off his board started flipping, and I just kept going up and up. And then I was in the clouds and I couldn't see anything. And then all of a sudden it went boop, and I landed in some water. And it wasn't the ocean, it was fresh water. I got water in my mouth, and clouds lifted a little bit, and I was on this huge stretch of water. It was all flowing in one direction. It's what we now know as an atmospheric river. And so I was on this river floating with my beach ball, and it was so beautiful and pristine, and there's hardly any garbage except for me that had blown up. A few stingrays had blown up when we're jumping around, and then all of a sudden behind me shoots up through the water this bright yellow surfboard, and I'm able to grab it, and I'm able to get it while I still have my beach ball, and I take all the air out of my beach ball and I stuff them in my swimming trunks, and I'm trying to get up on the surfboard. And after several tries, I'm finally up on the surfboard. I'm like a cool California surfer. Well, there weren't any waves. There were just a few little swells here and there, but hey, I'm still doing it. And I'm just going along, and I'm thinking how great I am. And my legs start getting tired and a little bit shaky. And then there was a couple bigger swells in a row, and I fall off the surfboard and I kick up, and my board goes up in the air, and the wind catches it, and it's off like 50 yards away. Well, I'm swimming as hard as I can to get to the surfboard. I just can't even get close to it. It's getting farther and farther away. So I lay down on my back and I blow my beach ball back up, and I'm just going down the river on my beach ball, and clouds clear up, and I can see to my right, I see the ocean is now way over to my right, and to my left, there's this snow-covered peak. And I look at that and I start going, man, I'm almost as high as that mountain. What's going to happen to me? Am I going to ride this river to get forever? How am I ever going to see my parents again? I'm so high, I'm almost as high as that mountain. What if I fall down? Oh. And I started crying, and then just out of the fog, there comes this styrofoam cooler, like a big commercial styrofoam cooler. And I'm able to get my beach ball in there and climb in there, and I'm not struggling anymore, and I'm just letting the winds and the currents take me where it will. Well, this went on for hours, and I was missing my mom. I even was missing my sisters. And then the clouds lifted again, and I could see I was going over this city, and I was much, much lower than I had been before. I was just going barely over the buildings, and I went over this big white building, and it looked like a state capitol or something. And the cooler just kept kind of drifting toward the left edge of the river, and I didn't have any way to steer it. And So started getting closer to the left edge. All of a sudden I could actually see the ground down through the river. The river wasn't only that deep. And then all of a sudden I went, poof, and dropped with the raindrops. I was able to get my beach ball and put it under my butt. And then that cooler hit the ground and smashed into 1,000 pieces. But my beach ball acted as an airbag and I popped up in the air and I came down in some water. Well, got my senses back. I looked around and I was in this flooded little backwater somewhere in a residential area. And my beach ball was floating right next to me and I hugged my orange beach ball. And then I went to the nearest house and this really nice lady saw this shivering 11-year-old in his swimming trunks, and she brought me in and she gave me hot cocoa and she dressed me in some warm clothes and gave me a blanket and called the highway patrol. The highway patrol hooked me up with my parents and I got to talk to my mom on the phone and she was crying. And then several hours later, my parents came and picked me up. So when I got back to South Dakota, people would ask me, what'd you do in your vacation? And I would tell them my story. And some of them didn't believe me. So after a while, I just gave them the typical Midwestern answer. Well, how'd you like California? Oh, not so bad. Could have been worse, you know.
That was good, John.
Well, John, that was almost like, I don't know, a fairy tale, but it was a really good story. Thank you so much. Well, our not least but last teller is Ed Lewis. And he has been telling stories for a long, long time. He's also known as a guy named Eddie Spaghetti. And I don't know, he's got a whole bunch of stuff he's done and I don't want to read this whole card. So I'm just going to turn it over to Ed because he could tell his background better than I can.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Well, before I begin the story, I want to thank Vicky because she probably doesn't remember this, but I was in the kindergarten class that she talked about. And I saved the gingerbread cookie from that time period. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay, so one of my favorite childhood memories is diving off our 30-foot wooden cruiser up in the San Juan Islands, which are just south in Washington State, if you don't know, just south of the Canadian border. I would dive off that boat and I'd swim up to my Uncle Wally. And he'd pick me up, give me a great big bear hug, and put me up on his shoulders. And together we would say, "Let the adventure begin." And we would head on down the beach and go beach combing, looking for agates and all kinds of different rocks and shells. And we'd spend maybe an hour doing that while my parents rowed in. They had a little glass rowboat that they'd row in and meet my Aunt Helen, my mom's sister. And they would go up this ladder up to this round house that they lived in. It had the best view. Once you were up there, you could see all the San Juan Islands. There's really about 1,000 of them, but there's 4 main islands in the San Juans. And this is actually the main island, San Juan Island. You could even look all the way up into Canada and see some of the mountains up there. So after maybe an hour or so, my uncle and I would come back up that ladder and come up to the round house. And they'd have some really good food prepared, like crab dips, especially salmon. They would caught salmon all the time. And my favorite were the s'mores that we'd make. After lunch, we'd head on down and we'd get in Wally's boat. And Wally had bought my parents' 18-foot indoor-outdoor boat with that he had put on two 250 horsepower Johnson motors, and that thing could just scream. And we'd take off screaming, and we'd head out to some of the small islands, and we would go beachcombing, and we'd also set up the crab pots for the night, and which we were going to get the next day. And we do some salmon fishing, was my favorite thing. And we always, he knew all the spots, and we caught some of the best salmon you could. The first time out with him, I was 6 years old when I started going up there, and I went there every summer all the way up through until I was about 20 and moved on to other things. But that first time when I was 6 years old, we caught 20-pound king salmon. It was amazing. So we'd take that back and everybody would cook it up. And we would also then, while they were doing that, Uncle Wally and I would head out into the forest with our BB guns and rifles. We had 22 caliber rifles, and we'd do target practicing. And our job also was to find some of the rabbits that were around there and try and shoot a rabbit or two and bring it on back to the cooking pot, which we did. We were really good at doing that. So he taught me all kinds of interesting things, how to care for a boat, how to work on an engine. And at night after dinner, he'd set up a campfire and tell stories. And I just loved the stories about the caves that were spread around the islands that had buried treasure from the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, from pirates and military ships that had sunk. And of course, the next morning when we woke up, we'd be heading out in the boat to some of those caves and go exploring, looking for those treasures. But one of my favorite places to go was called Spiden Island. And if you know the San Juan Islands, it's a small island right off of the main island, Friday Harbor, San Juan Island. And at that time, it had been homesteaded in 1919, and they sold it in 1959 to two brothers that were taxidermists. And those brothers imported wild animals from Africa. They had lions on that island, giraffes, rhinos, tigers, all kinds of antelope. And they would mostly have celebrities come, and they'd take them on hunting trips in their vans to shoot these animals. Now, you couldn't go there unless you paid and went on this hunting trip, but we could go around on the boats, and you could actually, we would go up in seaplanes and fly over it. And it was just fascinating to see all these animals. But before long, once celebrities like John Wade would go up there and they'd hunt out of a van, they'd go and shoot these animals, right? So the locals had an uproar. And then I think it was 1962, Walter Cronkite did this expose on the inhumane things that were going on in this island. And that pretty much shut down the island. So, and they moved the remaining animals to the zoos in different places around the country. But to this day, there are still, they're called Mouflon sheep from Corsica, Italy. They had this a Sika deer from the Asian continents, and some other kind of another kind of a deer from Alaska or Europe that they had imported in. So you can still go there today. And I went there all throughout my life. I go up every summer. We still have a family house up on one of the islands. And I taken my grandson and my son as they were growing up, and we would always get in the seaplanes and go to those islands and go around the islands and look for those you know, you can't go on the island, it's private now, but we would always look for those things. Well, my uncle was just such an important part of my life. And after college, I got drafted during the Vietnam War. When I came back, you know, I suffered what is PTSD, known as that now. And I just needed to get my head together. And so I decided I was going to go on this 2-year backpacking trip around indefinitely around the world, and just going to figure out who I was, where I was going, get some peace in my life. And I presented this to my father, and I was going to 3 of my Army buddies. And my father said, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Get a job, get a master's degree in business, marry a secretary, have your kids, raise these children, and then save up your money. And if you want to go on a stupid trip like this, you can do it when you have enough money and when you retire." So at that time, my Uncle Wally was downstairs at my parents' house in Seattle, and he was recovering from heart surgery. I went to tell him the same story after speaking with my father, and he said, "I know exactly what your father said." And I said, "Yeah, you're right. What do you think, Uncle Wally?" And he said, "This is a golden opportunity for you. You need to do this. Do it now. Don't wait until you're 60, 70. You may not even be able to move by that age. You will learn so much. You're going to meet people all over the world." That's when young men and women were backpacking all around the world, and the hippie crowd. And I did that. And I met all kinds of interesting people. And that was some of the best advice that he ever gave me. And then the support. I wrote him a lot, and he gave me lots of encouragement. When they eventually got into real estate, and they made quite a bit of money up there. And then when they retired, they traveled around for a couple of years around Canada, United States, and they fell in love with Quartzsite, Arizona, which is right across the California border, close to the Columbia River, and Medford, Oregon. So they'd spend 6 months there. Snowbirds. They had a truck, a Jetstream, and a Toyota Corolla, and they'd haul that around, and they'd go to BLM land because it's free. You don't have to pay anything as long as you're self-contained. So the Snowbirds would do that. And I visited him there when I was 26 years old. And he said, "You're just in time for court. I'm holding court." Okay, meal was over, and he set up his lawn chair by his trailer. And there were about 6 other chairs, and these other guys came, those Snowbirds came, and they were very right-wing Republicans. And he was very liberal Democrat. And he said, "I hold court and I debate everybody, and we have the greatest time debating each other." And I watched him do this. And, you know, I was a young hippie and very liberal, and I had lots of ideas that were very similar to his. And it was just amazing listening to him. And then how he respected other people's opinions and how they debated. They didn't hate each other. They were friends. They'd sit around, drink beer. And he was just such a model for me. So, sorry, the emotions are coming up here. When I think back on Uncle Wally, I just really am thankful for the love he showed me and the courage to adventure life. Thank you. Woo!
Thank you, Ed. That was a good story. We all appreciated it a lot. Now, we're getting down to the end of our program, and I wanted to make a couple of announcements. First of all, I don't know if you all know that we are going to have a Sacramento Valley Storytelling Festival, May 20th, 1 through 9 at Dante Center. And the tickets are on Eventbrite, but the ticket sales won't cover our costs. So we need donations to cover the cost of the festival. You can go to sacramentostorytellerguild.org and click the button to donate now if you enjoy storytelling and want us to continue trying to do this storytelling festival. There's also some forums right over there if you would like to get one of those. And, oh, be a member.
Membership.
Yes, a membership.
There's
one.
also a donation for the
Yeah.
Valley. section.
Yes, there's a donation basket right over there if you have any spare change today. Well, I also want to tell you, next month, February theme is the power of love, and the host will be Mark Berry. So, yes. So if you want to come next month, we'll be here and we will love to have your company. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being a host, and thank you guys too.
Thank you.
So I'd like to add one thing, is when this festival comes up, on May 20th, Saturday, May 20th, we have 3 featured storytellers, and I know all of them personally. And these are very high-level professional storytellers. One of them is Willie Claflin, and he is the funniest man you will ever meet. He's going to have a workshop on using puppets. He has Maynard Moose that's how he really got famous in this. But he lived in Maine. He was a hippie in Berkeley, and he and his wife went to Maine. Got interesting stories about living out there, going back and living off the land was their plan. And he is just hilarious and a very warm, loving person. And then the other 2, so he's going to do a workshop. And then the other 2 people are Claire Hennessy and Corey Rosen, and they're good friends from the Bay Area. And Claire has just published a book in storytelling. She puts on this fantastic event called 6 Feet Apart. So if you ever want to find out about it, you can just go online and see the events they have. They're all on Zoom at this point. She is an amazing storyteller. She's won many awards. And then Corey Rosen, and they do workshops together. Corey Rosen is the MC for The Moth in San Francisco. And he's won many awards also. He just MC'd one of our last events at the Storytelling Association of California. He's a great storyteller, excellent workshop leader, and an amazing MC. So those are going to be 3 people. And then we have 5 of our local regional people will be telling at that. Mark Berry is one of them at that festival. And then so there'll be workshops, and the Corey and Claire will be doing a workshop on telling stories, more of a beginning storyteller.
Everyone has a story or a story better told, something like that.
Yeah. So, and they're amazing. So it's going to be a nice day. We're also have an open mic period. So any of you can sign up to do that.
Where's it gonna be?
It's called the Dante Club, which is over by Sac State. Is it on Fair Oaks Boulevard and Howe, pretty much in that area? So that's going to be an amazing festival. And I didn't know if you guys actually said it, but we can all go online and get tickets. Now they're $25 for a ticket, and then we can make donations to it. Eventbrite.
Eventbrite.
1 to 9. So
Hello, everyone. I want to introduce my friend Renee Marie. Her title today is Despite DNA. And Renee is a poet, and I am proud to introduce her. She is inspirational in all she has accomplished. Her positive attitude and down-to-earth personality captures everyone she meets. She has just completed an MFA in narrative and poetic medicine at Dominican University of California. She has completed Amherst Writers and Artists Institute method for facilitating writing groups in underserved populations. She has an AA in studio arts from ARC. She maintains a working studio space at the East Street Gallery downtown and curates or participates in group shows for Second Saturday. Please welcome Renee.
Thank you so much, Vicki. I do want to clarify, I have not completed my MFA. I am in my 2nd year at Dominican University of California, San Rafael, and it's in narrative and poetic medicine. Today, I'm going to start with the poem Despite DNA, and I'm glad that you all got a copy. I call this an art poem. It has some of my art on one side and the poem is a companion to the artwork. And these poems will be the leading page to each chapter in my memoir. Despite DNA, I was born of rage, baby rage. I was raging, the product of a 3 or 4 minute surrender to child adults. I arrived the 3rd of 5, December 1960. Somehow, against all odds, I chose to survive and thrive. Girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, white European weeds scattershot in the same house, same hell, same trance, unaware that somewhere very close to this, living was just nice. I remember their names, but never really knew them, then lost them all in very different ways. I ran away 4 times by the time I was 15, loved a brown boy and a Puerto Rican boy, and dreamed about his sister Maritza long before knowing why. Somehow, I poured my DNA into pens, canvas, college, churches, army barracks, marriage, and parenthood, searching to find myself alive. I would, if I could, make reason of it all, singing my yes and thank you, please for the pennies. I kissed them, flipped them all into wishing wells, begging only for everyone to be free, even me. This is the beginning of my first chapter, Decade 1, Choosing to Breathe, Alive in Chaos, 1960 to 1970, Waterbury, Connecticut. I wonder if the labor and delivery team said, just tell her you love her, before my mother passed out from the exhaustion of labor. 55 years later, those are the exact words a palliative care nurse gave to me. It was about an hour after Mom's primary care doctor told me on the phone that she did not want cancer treatment. I drove to the hospital in a new kind of detachment daze. This was day 10 in the hospital. She had become increasingly incoherent on the morphine drip. Stage 4 small cell metastatic lung cancer had spread throughout her body. There she was, vacant, speechless, just hours earlier whispering, I want to die, but not to me, to the doctor. Did she think that was best? I felt so hurt, so hollow. This was the woman who gave me life. It still haunts me that she did not want to have one last coherent conversation with me. There are so many things she could have shared or asked me. Just one last push past the pain, alert enough to share a parting wish, wisdom, or gratitude. She left without any of these. I would have to make my own assumptions about why she chose to exit that way. Back to December 1960. It was just 2 weeks before Christmas. I was born, the 3rd child, to ill-prepared parents, Gary Lee Cunningham and Althea Ann McDonald. I wonder now if those words, just tell her you love her, were offered after her last scream and push of labor on the day she and I met. We'll clean her up and bring her to you in a little bit. Just tell her you love her, Mom. Was I a beautiful little present, swaddled, cared for, and delighting even my older sister and brother? Geneva, we called her Jenny, was almost 2, and Gary Jr. was 11 months old. I suspect that my mother simply surrendered to his demands, but I wonder what it was like when our parents first met. I know a little bit about their home life as kids. My heart goes out to both of them anytime I see, hear, or speak their names. I know some of the tragic events that must have influenced their lack of healthy coping strategies. I do feel an aching forgiveness for them. But why did they bring 5 human beings into their nightmare? They met at Danbury High School in Danbury, Connecticut. They married at age 16. Mom dropped out and started having babies. My father eventually went on to get a draftsman's certificate at Henry Abbott Technical School. All 6 of us were painfully stuck, but why did that have to happen that way? And then baby Deborah was born, making us a brood of 5. My mother once shared that her mother scorned her with these words, "You made your bed, now lie in it," when she would ask for help. I learned that that was typical of the time, the 1950s and 60s, but why couldn't grandma or any other adult see that the children in that family were suffering terribly? Why didn't that ever matter to any of them? In a physically, emotionally, and sexually violent home, all I wanted to do was save everyone. But of course, children have no idea how. A school nurse and guidance counselor called me in to talk one day and saw bruises on my arms and back. Nothing happened. No rescue. That was shortly after the time my father got up on New Year's Day, yelling at Gary, me, Jenny, and Bobby down in the basement for possibly waking up their overnight guests with our playing sounds. He threw Jenny against the basement door where the hat and coat hooks were. He pushed Bobby off the little tricycle that we rode around those metal support pillars in wild figure 8s. Gary and I ran upstairs to the bedroom that Jenny and I shared. When our father came in, he peeled his belt away from his waist, rolling one end around his palm and proceeding to swing that belt, the buckle end, at our little bodies. Gary pushed me into the corner of the room where the bed was against 2 walls. He wanted to protect me. My father pulled at the mattress between the swings of that wide belt. We slipped down to the floor like worms on wet glass, and Gary said, "Stay behind me." We tried to hang on to the box springs, wire, and wood slats as he swung his belt wildly into the space, jerking the metal bed frame on wheels back and forth, trying to release our terrified grip. Mom finally came in, trying to hush and calm him. "Someone's going to call the police. Stop it. What's the matter with you?" He finally left the room. Mom washed the blood off my arm, looking compassionate. She put some Vaseline on the gash and some type of bandage. Nothing came of it, though. During that meeting with those 2 caring adults at John Pettibone School after the holiday break, I vividly remember telling them how much I loved school, how lucky I felt to live in a country where kids get to go to school. Couldn't they see that I was trying so hard to find something to be grateful for outside of the abusive home? I think this would have been around 1968. No wonder why years later, I would have an emotional meltdown working in my first professional job in 1994 as a full-time speech and language pathologist in 2 rural Virginia elementary schools, because I witnessed very emotionally wounded children being harassed and chastised by their very ill-prepared teachers, very exhausted school systems. It brought back terrible feelings of danger, being discounted and powerless. I ended up in the hospital, so fearful of my suicidal ideation. I could not see myself participating in a world any longer where the free will of adults can result in what I saw then, the endless suffering of children without rescue. A world where parents and school staff are not properly trained or supported, and where a general lack of community or accountability results in great disparities in quality of life. Writing this memoir is one of the most positive actions that I can take as I sift through my 6 decades of memory while I'm still here. Perhaps this retelling will prevent just one child from being overlooked in their time of need. During this writing, I have chosen to power forward through an MFA program in narrative and poetic medicine, Dominican University of California, San Rafael, 2022 through 2024. This commitment requires that I revisit some of those traumas in order to make thorough amends and to let my only child, now 37 years old, and other readers know that some kids can come from terrible circumstances and not only survive, but thrive. Thank you for listening.
That's 8 minutes and 30 something seconds. You were perfect.
Wow, that's
That,
great.
that particular section. Hang on.
Oh.
Renee, we want to thank you for sharing your heartfelt story. And we appreciate all the authenticity that you shared with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a great show and thank you for letting me host. I really had a good time.
Thanks, you guys. That was so.
All
awesome.
together.
That was just.
Yeah, yeah.